Many cannabis growers can grow, cure, and process the plant. But what does it take to make good medicine? Welcome to the Dispense Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Sven Hosford. In this podcast, we'll find out just what it takes to make good medicine with Dr. Corey Burchman, the Chief Medical Officer for Acreage Holdings, the parent company of Prime Wellness of PA, which has a grower-processor permit and whose products can be found in most Pennsylvania dispensaries. He describes his medical career and how he discovered medical cannabis as an effective tool for treating chronic pain. It was the late 90s, and as he'll tell us, they were handing out opioids like candy. Well, that awakening led to more research and a deep understanding of the need for more education to help bust the myths around cannabis. Dr. Burchman believes all claims about cannabis should be backed by solid science. He is the author of a May 2017 study that found a significant reduction of opioids, antidepressants, and alcohol when pain patients began using medical cannabis. This conversation is full of fascinating insights about the science and current research on cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, and just what kind of education is needed for patients and physicians. I started by asking Dr. Burchman about the advantages of working for a large multi-state company.
Well, there's some very distinct advantages with respect to being a large company, but first of all, not being a corporate person. I've been a clinical physician for over 3 decades, always in the operating room. I'm an anesthesiologist and pain management doc, and I'm not a corporate person, but being exposed at this relatively high corporate level, I've gained to appreciate fundamentally, first of all, how smart the people are that I've been surrounded by and how mindful they are about patient care. And that has really invigorated my excitement and interest in the corporate side of things. And so while the Acreage might be a large company, knowing that from the leadership on down to the dispensary in all of our respective states, particularly since I have a role in training and educating those people, it makes me feel really good about, A, what we're doing, and B, the attitude that we are approaching what I would consider medical cannabis therapy.
Very good to hear. You mentioned you're still working in the operating room now?
No. I retired earlier this year after 33 years. But I still have a very active role in medicine. I still have a clinical faculty appointment at Dartmouth, and actually now I'm on the admissions committee, so I interview medical school applicants. But I still go and participate in the continuing medical education. I consider myself a mentor to the young doctors. So I'm very active in medicine, just not taking care of patients in the operating room or in the pain clinic now.
Give us a thumbnail sketch of your medical background before you got into cannabis, and then what led you into and got you involved in cannabis.
Okay, sure. Well, I am trained as an anesthesiologist with a fellowship in neuroanesthesia as well as pain management. And in neuroanesthesia, I was the individual who took care of the patients who had head injury and spine injury and brain tumors and spinal surgery. And so I've always had an interest in neuroscience and did some research at NIH when I was younger. And that sort of segued into anesthetic care. And I was very active in pain management as well and had a pain management practice in private practice in Pennsylvania. And then came to Dartmouth when I was sort of tired of working 70 hours a week for 15 years straight. And in the academic realm, I continued with both clinical intraoperative anesthesia and pain control. And I would say probably around the late 90s when we were prescribing opioids like candy in the pain clinic, because not so much that big pharma was pushing it, but we didn't have a lot of analgesic options for significantly chronic painful conditions. I had many patients, just anecdotally, stating about the improved effects they had with cannabis, which wasn't even medical cannabis at the time. It was just sort of illicit marijuana. And so I had an interest in it way before California even passed legislation to allow for that. And that sort of just developed into a more intense interest. I did a relatively deep dive in the paucity of research that was around at the time. And then I actually started putting some of my patients on medical cannabis once it was available through legal channels, and I was very impressed with it. And I could go on, but that sort of brought me into the what I would call the enlightenment of using cannabis as a therapy.
Sure. Talk about your main roles and activities as the chief medical officer. What kinds of things do you get involved in specifically?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm the only physician in the corporation, which is good on several levels. One is I can direct the agenda, and I would say, as I said, from the top down, there's a strong interest in patient safety and patient care, and that's something I've been involved in all of my professional life. And so I set a lot of agendas with respect to the adherence of proper education and information dissemination. Education. Well, as you well know, marijuana or cannabis has so many urban myths enveloped in the culture. There are a multitude of health claims that can be made about cannabis that are patently untrue or unfounded without any research basis. And one of the things I told Kevin Murphy, who was the CEO, when we discussed a potential position for me, is that I was going to insist on very few health claims unless there were substantive research, well-designed studies that could back it up. And those studies exist for certain conditions. So one of my jobs is to on a continuing basis, cull the urban myths from the lexicon of even the frontline people who work in the dispensaries, and talk only facts, only science-based facts with respect to the medicinal effects of cannabis, the terpenes, the minor cannabinoids. So that's number one. So information. Number two, education. I have a very active plan that I'm rolling out with respect to both physician outreach and patient outreach. And they're two different pillars. Doctors nationally have a real void in their knowledge base of cannabis. And one of my principal charges is to foster appropriate education, again, backed by research where applicable. I was fortunate when I was at Dartmouth to have co-chaired two large medical educational symposia, which were clinical in nature, that were targeted towards the physician primarily, and discussing the endocannabinoid system, the science of cannabinoid receptors, how the different cannabinoids, primarily THC and CBD, work in the body. And so physician education is very important. Patient education as well. I want patients to understand, and it's very interesting because of the federalist nature of the Schedule I agent. Every state has its own set of rules, and there are varying qualifying indications for patients in each state. And so one of my interests is in educating patients as to, well, why would cannabis work for Crohn's disease? Or what's the mechanism of action of how pain control occurs with low dose and high dose THC? So those are some of my principal activities.
So speaking of patient safety, of course, the news on everybody's lips right now is the situation around vaping. And I know that Prime, PA, and Acreage both put out statements about that. What can you say about the subject? How
well, I've played a very active role in educating the company on the science behind the disease situation that's going on right now nationally. First of all, obviously, patient safety is paramount. And the first thing we wanted to do was assess any of the products that our company produces and sells to ensure that there were no components that were in any way playing a role in this national health crisis. And I can certainly say that we have done that, and there are no mediators that are provoking illness.
And even though the each state has its own set of regulations around it and levels of strictness, this is a company-wide policy with in all the states that you're in.
That's correct. That's correct. And I have probably spent the last 2 to 2.5 weeks looking at literally hundreds of products and their components to make sure that we don't use vitamin E acetate, for example, and other diluents or products that could that have been known, at least to the CDC, as being potentially provocative. It's my impression, and again, it's founded on some of the data that's coming out of the CDC right now, that by and large, it seems to be a black market issue. Right. That people are adulterating the cartridges, either nicotine delivery or THC delivery devices, and certainly no products from our company that we've produced were found in any way to be part of this problem. But we have an ongoing surveillance program. We're looking at all of the products, as I said, and our vendors. And further, it's very important to reach out to the patients and inform them that what they're getting is considered safe here if it's purchased in an Acreage store, and that we will continue to keep them informed if any other news from the federal level comes down to us.
And it seems like a lot of the focus now is shifting certainly to the black market, but more to the e-cigarette nicotine side of things as well.
Well, that's true. But again, the story, knowing the CDC and how they operate, they are extremely thorough. And so the final chapter has not been written yet, and we will just have to see. But I think this is obviously a situation that warrants scrutiny and very good, transparent information to both the company and the patients. I feel it's my responsibility. I've been very active in it.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. I sent you the relief page that we did in this issue. Did you get a chance to look that over?
I did.
And so are you familiar with the relief app and how that works?
No, but it looked like a very novel idea.
Yeah, basically, patients get an app. It's a free app, and they record all the information about every time they dose, what they took, what form, how much, how did it work, a very detailed thing for each time. And then the dispensaries and physicians have a good way to track, what's working for them and what dosage is helpful. And then that gives the physicians at least something that they can turn to try to address that, what products might work well and so forth. So we publish that every print issue. We make it available online as well. And it gives us the top 10 conditions in Pennsylvania and the top 5 products for each condition. And you guys are on there quite a bit. You have a lot of good products.
I noticed that. And I think that's, first of all, I laud your enthusiasm about doing that, because I think data is so important in this field, because when we approach, at the federal level, when we're talking to congressional leaders and senators, we want to be able to demonstrate, even though this is anecdotal and it's personal testimony stuff, it's very compelling, and it's extremely useful. And I appreciate the fact that you do this.
Oh, you're welcome. I find it fascinating, and I'm learning more and more working with doctors and talking to doctors that, besides not knowing anything about the endocannabinoid system, it seems like the main sticking point where they get kind of stuck is that they don't know what to say about dosage. They don't know what products to say or what forms or anything like that. And that makes doctors very nervous to not be able to say that.
I absolutely agree. I deal with doctors daily. And because cannabis is a botanical product and it's not packaged like a pharmacy derived medicinal, it's not 200 milligrams of ibuprofen in a bottle of 100 tablets. It's a hard concept for some physicians to see through. And we could dive deeply into patient dosing because, I'm an anesthesiologist. I've been giving drugs and dosages all my life. But the point is, we as physicians who treat patients with cannabis, we're interested in response. And so we always tell patients, and what I stress to physicians is to go slowly and begin slowly and with what I would call low doses and increase or titrate as necessary. And that's what you have to do with a botanical product.
And I know I've talked to a lot of the pharmacists here at the dispensaries in Pennsylvania, and that's one of the things that patients have a little bit of a time getting used to is that they have to be the ones to listen to their own body, feel their own body, and decide whether they increase, decrease, try something else. There's no set, take this number of pills and call me in 3 weeks.
Precisely. And then the other thing, Sven, is, and something we say in medicine, there is what is called inter-individual variation. In other words, no two people can respond the same to the same drug. And that's why, again, as you said with the pharmacist, we inform the patients to go low, go slow, and be in touch with your body and the response.
Yeah. Now, Pennsylvania just announced, or they allow doctors to recommend for anxiety, and that has created a huge new rush of patients. What's your understanding of cannabis and anxiety and its effectiveness?
Well, I was just recently at a major meeting in Bethesda of the International Cannabis Research Society, which is a very basic biomolecular pharmacology, nerdy sort of a meeting. It's not real clinical medicine, but it's research. And a lot of the research coming out on CBD, particularly moderate to even high dose CBD in relieving anxiety and anxiety disorders is very exciting. And both in preclinical or what we call animal models, as well as human models, research studies right now, it's very, very compelling. So I'm extremely optimistic about it. The short answer is there is definitely some role in cannabinoids, particularly non-psychoactive cannabinoids such as CBD, as well as some of the terpenes in relieving anxiety.
Well, let's talk about the research. You actually were the author of a May 2017 study.
Yes.
That found a significant reduction in the use of opioids, anti-depressants, and alcohol for pain, anxiety, and sleep among cannabis patients in New England. That was published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology.
Yes.
How about that?
Well, that was really interesting, and that research study was conceived as a spin-off of a real landmark paper that was put out in the Journal of the American Medical Association maybe 6 months prior. The point being that there's an entity called the substitution effect. And what that means is it's an observation when a patient substitutes one thing for another. In this case, patients were substituting medical cannabis for other drugs. In the JAMA, I'll talk about my study in 1 second, but what the JAMA study showed by looking at multiple states that had medical cannabis laws, there was a significant decrease in prescription opioid deaths in states that had medical cannabis laws in place, comparing them to states that did not. And they controlled for many other variables, age, disease states, et cetera. The point is the belief was that patients were using medical cannabis primarily for pain control, which has a much better safety profile than opioids. And so the study we did in Maine replicated that in the sense that we went directly to the patients and asked them, and I think we asked about 1,600 patients, and the substitution effect was absolutely what we saw. And patients admitted to significant reductions in not only opioids, but anti-anxiety meds, sleep meds, meds they were using for depression, and even a few patients who were using cannabis as apparently a treatment for sleep apnea, which is very interesting and actually has spawned further studies looking at cannabis treatment for sleep apnea.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that. It's been something I've been wrestling with for several years now.
I was talking to somebody just the other day. The word research is very interesting because good research, even bad research, in terms not bad in the sense, but if you don't get the results you want, that's very useful as well. When you search for something and you get data that's compelling, you want to tease it out. And then it begets another study. That's where the in research comes in, and it's quite interesting. Because we're limited in the amount of research we can do in this country due to the Schedule I nature of cannabis, there's still a lot of studies that have been going on, some in some major centers, some not relegated to THC, but to other cannabinoids and terpenes. And so there is a larger body of research that's growing in this country, although a lot of the data is coming from overseas.
What excites you the most about any current research or anything recently that you've seen that's very exciting?
Well, I, having been a physician who prescribed thousands and thousands of grams of opioids in my career, the fact that we now have, and we're at the precipice of this sort of anti-opioid revolution because of the crisis that practice has put us in, to be able to have what I would consider quite a safe avenue for controlling pain is very exciting to me. And we are going to see, mark my words, the medicalization of cannabis in a much more formal and codified way in the next decade. And by that I mean that pharma is going to come in. They're already coming in a little bit now, but there will be a time when patients will be able to go to their CVS or their drugstore and get prescription cannabinoids for pain control. And that will be a major step towards reducing addiction as well as improving safety in analgesic care. And that's just one spoke of the wheel.
I know there's a lot of focus right now on the THC to CBD ratio. What's your understanding about how important that is in helping to determine what the right medicine is for people?
Well, if I knew the answer, I think I would be very well off.
You'd be the chief wizard officer, right?
I would be the chief wizard officer. Well, obviously THC is the psychoactive component in cannabis. CBD has a realm of therapeutic effects, anti-anxiety as well as analgesia. It really, as I said, remember I spoke at the beginning about this inter-individual effect. Patients vary in terms of responsivity to certain drugs. So it depends on what the condition is. Let's just take chronic pain, because that seems to be a very common one that people reach for cannabis for. Both CBD and THC, they work differently at different receptors in the body. And if a patient does not want to have the effects of euphoria, you really need to limit that THC. And so perhaps a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio of CBD and THC is useful. When used in combination, there seems to be some significant synergy in terms of how well they are at, say, combating neuropathic pain or chronic pain. But again, it's such a wide field because of the various indications, movement disorders, anxiety, satiety, that is appetite. So it gets pretty complex. You sort of have to pick the disorder and then talk about, well, how are we going to get to it? How are we going to treat it? Does that answer make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. It does. One of the things that you hear a lot of back and forth about is, CBD works just fine by itself versus, no, you need a little bit of THC to make it work more effectively. Is that the basic argument right now?
Well, first of all, what you just said is an accurate statement. But again, it depends on depends on the malady. For example, CBD has been demonstrated, particularly in pediatric patients, to be effective for a spectrum of seizure disorders. THC has no real bearing on that. So you really want a CBD primary, pharmacologic approach. But in the body, if say let's talk about pain because it's a system I know and understand fairly well. Both of them act at diminishing pain through neurologic transmission, and they act at different areas. And so by using them in combination, you can sort of put the fire out a little more readily. So again, you have to sort of pick the indication and then try to determine how best to attack it.
Sure. Well, you're very knowledgeable about all these different aspects of the endocannabinoid system and a lot of the latest research. What should any working physician in America now have as their basic understanding of cannabis? What are they missing?
I can tell you. They're missing a good fundamental education. It turns out that the endocannabinoids, I'm going to get a little geeky on you just for a minute.
Just geek away. We love it.
All right. Well, the endocannabinoid system is actually, it turns out that the body is full of these cannabinoid receptors. They were discovered by Raphael Mechoulam in the 1960s. He described THC initially. And why are there like marijuana receptors in the body? I mean, what the hell's that all about? Well, it turns out that the body produces marijuana-like molecules, and these are called endocannabinoids. And so then they discovered this fact, and then they found out that it turns out the endocannabinoid receptor, particularly in the brain and the spinal cord, is the most common receptor in the brain and spinal cord. I mean, why the hell is that? So it has to be pretty damn important. And it turns out that the endocannabinoid system is involved in so many body systems. The relief in an immunologic sense, regulation of immune function. It's how the body recognizes cancer and bacterial and viral invaders. It regulates how the body moves and how the transmission of neurologic impulses affect muscle. It affects your brain telling you that you're hungry. It affects the excitability of electrical tissues such as brain activity. In other words, it's a vast network of importance. And so and physicians understand science and they understand receptors. Once they understand that there's a real scientific basis to this, they have an appreciation for the fact that marijuana is a cannabinoid factory. It happens to be from a plant. It's not from the body, but the same very similar molecules are produced by this plant. Why? I have no idea. But the point is that it's sort of a manufacturing facility for phytocannabinoids, which are plant-based cannabinoids that have pharmacologic activity. Did I get too into the weeds for you, or is that good?
That was perfect. It was perfect.
Yeah, and so again, the short answer is I'm really interested in physicians understanding the true molecular basis for why marijuana is an important part of therapeutic care.
And as I understand it, the endocannabinoid systems helps regulate almost or every other system in the body. Is that
Well, I wouldn't say every other system, but as I said, I listed a few of the body systems, and the fact is, if you were to examine the brain, particularly the brain and the spinal cord, but as well the periphery, these cannabinoid receptors outnumber insulin receptors and glucose receptors. I mean, these are very basic molecules in the body, and as such, there's got to be an important reason. There really, really does. And so the endocannabinoid system, as you rightly said, is probably one of the singularly most important regulatory systems to sustain life. And we're just discovering this now. And that is why I feel that, cannabis is at least one of the tools we have to extract these molecules and start the long process of teasing out what works, in what dose, on what condition. It's almost like rediscovering medicine. It's sort of like when you discover the discovery of antibiotics in the 40s. I mean, a whole different field of molecular medicine is sort of at our doorstep right now. And so I'm pretty excited about it. I just wish I was 30 years younger so I could see how it's going to play out.
Have more time. I know. I feel the same way. So as a patient goes to a doctor, it's no longer acceptable in your mind that a doctor says, well, I didn't learn it in medical school and there's not enough research, or any of the other excuses that doctors use to not be knowledgeable about that. That's no longer acceptable, right?
Having had a career in medicine, you come to understand that education is a continual paradigm. What you learned even 10 years ago may be obsolete. And so important educational sources are necessary to advance the cause. And hopefully what I'm doing at Acreage through their educational resources is going to help sort of, move the ball down the field.
Yeah. One more point about Pennsylvania, we have way more patients signed up now in the state than I think most people had an expectation of. And having been deeply involved in the process, I believe that a lot of it was how well the Department of Health reached out to educate doctors, to answer doctors' questions, to even create a medical advisory board. And then especially the continuing research licenses, where 8 major university hospitals are going to be given grow and dispensary licenses to do research. So I think there was a very solid feel among physicians, and we have now 1,200 or so publicly say they're certifying. That's a pretty good number for any state, right?
Oh, I think it's really good. And I must say, first of all, I lived in Pennsylvania for I think about 15 years. Pennsylvania really distinguished itself and came out as the first state to truly embrace the research integrated model among the states that had medical cannabis laws passed. And I've been very active. When I was in Pennsylvania, and even as an ex officio resident, been very active in the state from the research support standpoint. And I'm extremely excited about some of the things that are going to come from this research.
Well, Dr. Burchman, it's been a real pleasure. We've covered a lot of different topics here. I hope we can do this again. There's a whole bunch of things we could talk about and explore. It's been a pleasure. Look forward to doing this again soon in the future.
Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to having spoken, and I appreciate also Acreage for allowing me to espouse what I think is some real scientific input into this emerging industry.
That's it for this episode of the Dispense Magazine podcast. You can find out more about Prime Wellness and Acreage Holdings at primewellnesspa.com and acreageholdings.com. If you are in a legal state and you'd like to find a certifying physician or dispensary near you, visit dispensemagazine.com and search our free online database. You can find copies of our print magazine in every Pennsylvania dispensary, as well as dozens of doctors' offices, holistic centers, and retail locations across the state. To find out where or to read a copy online, visit dispensemagazine.com. I'm Sven Hosford. Thanks for listening. This has been a production of Dispense Magazine, LLC.